Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Imagine this, the world outside is completely pitch black. The only things guiding you are this faint, glowing dashboard in front of you and just a few strings of lights cutting through the absolute darkness. Today, we're stepping right into the cockpit. We're going to break down the exact, step-by-step procedural reality of a night takeoff and circuit.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really get a feel for this, I need you to put yourself squarely in the left seat of an aircraft. You're sitting right next to your flight instructor. It's totally dark outside, except for a couple of glowing lights out on the tarmac. Your instructor turns to you and says, "Today, I shall teach you a normal takeoff and standard circuit." That's it. It's just you, the machine, and the darkness.
But hey, before we can even think about pushing that throttle forward, we hit Section 1, the pre-takeoff vital actions, under the dome lights. So before we even ask air traffic control for permission to line up, we actually have to stop short of the runway. You bring the plane to this nice, gentle stop on the taxiway centerline right before the holding point. But here's a really cool detail. You don't just stop straight, you stop with the nose of the aircraft offset towards the approach. Why do we do that? Well, so you can actually see what's coming. Under the faint glow of the cockpit dome lights, you're building up your situational awareness. You're visually checking that black sky to make absolutely sure there are no other aircraft on the base leg, on final approach, or, already sitting on the runway.
Once you're holding position there, you rely on this incredibly critical memory aid to make sure you don't miss a single thing in the dark. It's called a TMAFISCH check. Let's break it down. Under those dome lights, you are meticulously checking your trim and setting the throttle friction. You make sure your mixture is rich. You check the ammeter, it should be reading 0 or positive, and you ensure your auxiliary fuel pump is off. Next up, you verify you have sufficient fuel and you set your flaps for takeoff. You check your instruments, you check your switches and magnetos, which by the way are what generate that vital spark for the engine. You make sure your flight controls are free and moving exactly as they should. And finally, you double check that your hatches and harnesses are totally secure. This methodical, letter-by-letter check, this is literally what keeps pilots alive when you can't rely on what's outside the window.
All right, checks are complete. Now the whole sensory experience starts to shift. You set the throttle to exactly 1,000 RPM, this makes sure the alternator is actually charging, and you double-check the parking brakes. Then you ask air traffic control for line permission. The second that clearance comes through, boom, you light up the aircraft. You switch on those landing and strobe lights, you release the parking brakes, gently open up the throttle, and you start creeping toward the flare path. The runway is right there waiting for you.
And that brings us to Section 2, lining up the flare path, precision in the dark. See, during the day, you have all these visual cues, right? At night, they're just gone. Instead, you're tracking a path of flares or runway lights. As you turn onto the runway, you're looking for a very specific visual perspective. It should literally feel like the flare path center lines are passing right between your feet. You look out, make sure you're seeing an equal number of flares on either side of the nose, roll forward just a tiny bit to straighten out that nose wheel, and then gently stop.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core duality of flying at night. It's like a constant balancing act. On one hand, you've got your visual reality. Your eyes are looking outside the cockpit, confirming that those flares are perfectly balanced on either side of the nose. But you can't just trust the dark, right? You have to immediately verify that with your instrument reality. You're glancing down at your DGI, your directional gyro indicator, basically your main heading instrument, and your compass to make sure they're actually showing the approximate runway heading. It's this intense, constant cross-check between what your eyes see outside and what the dials tell you inside.
Then, the moment arrives. Your departure clearance comes over the radio. We hit Section 3, the night takeoff roll, accelerating into the pitch black. Follow me on the controls here.
So, you're holding the control column and rudders in neutral. You release both toe brakes at the exact same time. Then, you open the throttle. But listen, you don't just jam it forward. That's a rookie mistake. It has to be a super smooth, gradual opening to a 5 count, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're literally matching the movement of your hand to the accelerating speed of the aircraft, hitting full throttle right on that 5 count.
As the plane starts surging down the runway, the actual physical feel of the controls starts to change in your hands and feet. You have to keep the aircraft perfectly straight, keeping those flares passing evenly on both sides of the nose. But you're fighting physics here. The aircraft naturally wants to yaw or pull to the left, so you compensate by pushing in some right rudder. And pay close attention to this. As your speed picks up, more and more air is rushing over the tail. Because of that, your rudder becomes way more sensitive and effective. You really have to feel it out. Now what's really interesting is this specific number, 55 knots. You're hurtling down this dark runway, watching that airspeed indicator climb. The very second you hit 55 knots, you apply just a gentle backward pressure on the control column, and just like that, the nose lifts up and you are officially airborne.
At this point, you're climbing away from those glowing flares below you. Initially, your speed is going to increase in a shallow climb, maybe around 65 to 70 knots. But your absolute target is 80 knots. That is your magic safe climb away speed. And here's the crazy part. Before you even pass the end of the flare path on the ground, your attention has to completely, deliberately transfer away from the outside world and lock onto your instruments inside the cockpit.
You're no longer on the ground. You're heading up into total darkness. Section 4. Transitioning to night flight, the climb sequence. Let's look at how this builds, because this chronological timeline is your literal roadmap in the sky. At exactly 100 feet above the ground, you just tap the brakes to stop the wheels from spinning. At 300 feet, you hit your after takeoff checks. You bring the flaps up, you adjust your trim, and you turn off those landing and taxi lights so they don't blind you with reflections on the cockpit glass. Hitting 500 feet, you take a quick look left and right to make sure the sky is clear, and then you start a gentle 10 to 15 degree climbing left turn toward the crosswind leg. You keep riding that climb until you hit 1,000 feet on the dot. Then you level out, dial the engine back to 1900 RPM, and trim the aircraft for level flight.
Which brings us to Section 5, Visual versus Instrument, the golden rule of night flying.
This is where you really start playing this intense mental ping pong. Outside the cockpit, you're relying on visual flying. You're squinting out there, trying to catch whatever faint horizon might be visible. You're looking back over your shoulder at the flare path to see if the wind is blowing you off course. You're scanning the pitch black for the flashing lights of anyone else up there with you. But then, almost instantly, your eyes have to dart right back inside for instrument flying. You're making sure your bank angle is correct. You're checking that the little slip indicator ball is dead in the center. You're confirming your speed is rock steady at 80 knots, and you are just constantly cross-checking that compass and the DJI. It's a relentless rhythm, outside, inside, outside, inside.
So the crucial point is summarized perfectly right here in the instructor's manual. Night flying is an intelligent combination of instrument and visual flying. It's so true. You cannot survive up there just relying on one or the other. It has to be this seamless, continuous blend of the two.
All right, we've got that balance down. Let's move to Section 6, flying the night circuit, the downwind leg.
Okay, so you're flying along, totally leveled out at 1,000 feet. You look over your left shoulder, back down at the flare path on the ground. You're waiting for a very specific visual trigger. When that runway is at exactly a 7 o'clock lateral displacement, basically right over your shoulder, that's your cue. Right at that precise moment, you execute a medium-level turn towards the downwind leg. Once you pull out of that turn, you've got a whole new set of downwind checks to run through. You roll out, so you're flying perfectly parallel to the flare path. Again, you're cross-checking your headings with the DJI and the compass. But I want you to really consider this third check. The manual actually includes a very serious warning. When you're flying in a dark sky, human psychology kicks in, and pilots have this really dangerous subconscious tendency to slowly bank and drift right toward those glowing lights on the ground. Seriously, it's like a moth to a flame. You have to actively fight that urge. You have to guard against converging onto the runway, just as much as you have to make sure you aren't accidentally drifting away from it.
It's an absolutely incredible test of discipline, isn't it? Think about it. Flying completely parallel to a runway that you can barely even see, fighting your own human instincts, all while constantly reading a bunch of spinning dials. So what does this all mean for us? Well, it leaves us with this final thought. Could you maintain that perfect sensory balance between your eyes and your instruments in the pitch dark? It takes immense focus, totally methodical preparation, and true sensory mastery. I really hope this explainer gave you a glimpse into the sheer technical skill it takes to pull off a night takeoff. Thanks so much for hanging out with me, and I'll catch you on the next one.